Qualifying for the Bahrain Grand Prix is over, and it is pole position for Oscar Piastri in the Mclaren, as teammate Lando Norris once again makes a silly error and throws away what should be a front row lockout for McLaren. But what did we learn? Well, in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at the data and doing a data analysis from qualifying. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get into the video. As usual, I'll be talking about the top teams later on, so please do stick around for that. Yep, qualifying in Bahrain is over, and I feel like McLaren will be a bit disappointed with that result, as really it should have been both cars on the front row of the grid, but instead it is only Oscar Piastri. Qualifying was not without incidents and a few shock results, which we will be getting into a little bit later on. It was overall a qualifying session which saw a lot of circuit evolution, which is what you can see here when you look at all of the lap times set by Oscar Piastri, and you can see that between the sessions there was definitely a large improvement in lap time. Let's now compare the first lap from Q1 to the pole lap from Q3, so we can see how the times changed during qualifying. What are the main changes that we can see then when we look at these two laps? Well, the very first thing that we can see is that Oscar in Q1 actually had a bit of a toe and slipstream as he reaches a higher top speed, which is something we don't usually see in qualifying, but on the exit, Piastri in Q3 already gets a much better exit. Then going through the turn 5, 6, 7 section, Piastri carries a lot more speed and gets back on throttle much sooner in Q3, indicating that he has a lot more grip and confidence as the circuit has cleaned up, and also Piastri is just more committed in Q3. The next area where there is a large difference is on the exit of turn 11 here. Here you can see a massive jump in time as Piastri gets back on full throttle very early, and here alone he gains 0.3 of a second. Overall, from the start of Q1 to the end of Q3, Oscar Piastri improved his lap time by 1.5 seconds. Something interesting though that I do want to point out is Oscar Piastri's pole position lap time is actually 0.7 of a second slower than what Max Verstappen was able to do last year, showing how much worse the circuit conditions were this year, as the cars are definitely not 0.7 slower than last season. So we've seen how the times changed, but now let's take a look at the top speeds and let's see how they change from practice, and what can we see here? Well, what we can see is that the fastest cars in a straight line was actually Williams and Racing Bulls, as Hajar and Albon were both able to reach 323 km per hour. In general, it has to be said, everyone's top speed was actually lower than Friday, indicating that most teams probably increased the amount of downforce that they were running from Friday to Saturday. When it comes to the top teams, Ferrari were the fastest cars in a straight line, as Charles Leclerc hit 321 km per hour. McLaren were once again still the slowest cars in a straight line, only hitting 319 km per hour, potentially indicating that Lando Norris has made his life a little bit more difficult in the Grand Prix, as he has to do his overtaking on track. In the midfield then, let's talk about Alpine, because for Alpine it is a vastly improved performance from them, and it is looking more like the Alpine team that I expected to see at the start of the season, as Pierre Gasly finds himself starting the Grand Prix from a pretty brilliant 5th place. Well, scratch that, it's now 4th place after the penalty for Kimi Antonelli, and Jack Doohan also had a solid performance and finds himself just outside the top 10 with an 11th place start. Gasly even beat Norris. So let's compare the lap times of Lando Norris and Pierre Gasly to see how it happened. When you look at these two laps, it looks like Norris loses a lap pretty quickly as Gasly gets a better exit from turn 1. Norris starts to slowly pull back the time though, and was going to beat him until they got to the very tight turn 10, when Norris again loses time to Gasly, and it looks like he goes in just a little bit too deep. Because of that, Gasly ends up beating Lando Norris, and finds himself in the lofty heights of P4 for the start of the Grand Prix. In the Grand Prix then, Alpine will be looking to score their first points of the season, which I think they should do now, given he's starting in 4th place. I just want to say if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now though, let's get back to the video and let's talk about Ferrari. For Ferrari then, it was a solid performance from Charles Leclerc, and he finds himself starting the Grand Prix on the front row in second place, which for him is a very impressive performance. But teammate Lewis Hamilton has had a bit of a shocker and will be starting from 9th place. I guess you could say he still has some floor damage from the first few races, or whatever his excuse was in Japan. Frankly, for Lewis Hamilton, this is a very underwhelming performance, and when you compare the laps of Lewis and Leclerc, you can see pretty clearly where Lewis lost the time. Going through turn 7 and going into turn 8, Hamilton just made a mistake and lost 0.4 of a second to Charles Leclerc. Then going through turn 10, Hamilton again couldn't hook it up and get the car turned like Charles Leclerc. Then from there, at each braking zone, Leclerc gains a little bit more time, and altogether there was a 0.6 of a second gap between them. In the Grand Prix, I expect Lewis to have a little bit of a comeback through the field. As for Charles Leclerc, he will be looking to try and beat the Mercedes cars of George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, but I fear that could be easier said than done to beat both of them, although the penalty has definitely helped his situation out just a little bit. For Red Bull then, it was a bit of a disaster for Max Verstappen, and he is starting the race in 7th place. But thankfully for Verstappen, his main rival in the championship is starting right next to him on the grid. Teammate Yuki Tsunoda though had a pretty solid performance by 2025 Red Bull standards, as he started the Grand Prix from 10th place. And honestly, for Red Bull, this is probably about as good as it gets, as well, Red Bull are really struggling this weekend with slow speed corners. Let's compare then the laps of Piastri to Verstappen, so we can see where the main differences were. And when you look at these two laps, it actually starts off alright for Max, as he gets a solid run through turn 1 and 2, and also turn 3, but then going through turn 5, 6 and 7, Piastri in the McLaren is just hooked up, and gets a fantastic run through that section. Turn 8 as well is where Verstappen loses quite a lot of time, then going into turn 11 as well, and also at the final corner, Piastri in the McLaren is able to just brake later as he has more confidence and probably still has a bit more performance in the tyres. And overall, there was 0.6 of a second between Verstappen and Piastri. In the Grand Prix, I don't really know what to expect from Red Bull. They looked like they were struggling a fair amount in practice. Verstappen will be hoping that he can get by Norris at the start, because if not, then I do think he will not be able to beat Lando in the Grand Prix, and, well, he won't be able to put himself in the lead of the Drivers' Championship. For Mercedes then, it was a great performance, as George Russell is starting the Grand Prix in 2nd place. Well, he would have been, but he's now starting it in 3rd place, and Kimi Antonelli is starting in 5th place. And for Mercedes, this is pretty much a better weekend, and they could potentially now get both drivers on the podium if all things goes well. This is a circuit that Antonelli knows quite well, and I think that has really helped him this weekend to be closer to George Russell. Let's now compare the times of the two drivers though, to see where the differences were between them. And when you look at these two laps, the main area is on the brakes. It looks like Antonelli is not braking quite as late as George Russell. He is looking at getting a better exit though, and he does tend to do that. But Antonelli is still leaving a little bit of time on the table in the braking zones. This is pretty much still to be expected, as he is a very young rookie against George Russell. But honestly, other than that, he is definitely closer this weekend, and Mercedes will be feeling confident that they can potentially get both drivers on the podium. And finally, for McLaren then, it was a bit of a bottle job from Lando Norris. All weekend, McLaren have been in a class of one. They are a long way clear of the rest of the teams in terms of race pace from practice, and this should be an easy one too. But life for them has been made a little bit more difficult, as Lando Norris couldn't hook up the lap when it mattered most. Once again, like we saw in China, Japan, and now Bahrain. I expect that he will still come through the field, but it has been made a little bit harder now. Let's compare the laps of Lando Norris and Piastri then, to see where Norris lost out. And when you look at these laps, you can see that through the first couple of corners alone, Lando Norris lost 0.2 of a second to Oscar Piastri. He does gain time though back through turn 8, but Piastri does get a better exit and open the gap back out. And at most of the braking zones, Piastri was a little bit later than Norris on the brakes, and overall he beats him by 0.4 of a second. With that being said, I do still think in the Grand Prix, we will see both McLaren cars on the podium. So with that in mind then, what are my predictions for the Bahrain Grand Prix? Well, in P5 I'm going to go for Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. P4, Charles Leclerc. P3 will be Lando Norris in the McLaren. P2 will be George Russell in the Mercedes. And Oscar Piastri will win the Bahrain Grand Prix. But those are my thoughts. The question is, what do you guys think will happen? In the comment section down below, please do let me know. And as always, comment, leave a like and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.